Hi, good afternoon. I think it's just in the afternoon now, 12:01. I'm Jeremy Cook from X3 Consulting, and I'd like to welcome everyone who's joining our series in webinars, the first one in 2025. So those of you who I've not said this to, who's joining the call, Happy New Year. Here we go for 2025. And I'm very pleased to say that we've got our first one of this year to be a subject close to my heart, as one of our customers is using the product now. We have a session on procession, which I'm going to introduce our partner on that in a second, Dan Riley, who will take the majority of the webinar time up that we've got. If you have any questions, please raise them in the chat, and I will have hopefully time with Dan to answer those questions at the end. And we're going to run this session for about 30 minutes in total. So really appreciate having you on board. Thank you to everyone that's taken the time to join us. And I'm now going to hand over to you, Dan, if that's okay.
Of course, Jeremy, and thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to your customer base and appreciate your time if you're watching this live or in a replay as we move forward. As Jeremy has noted, we are excited to continue working with X3 Consulting with regard to Sage X3 Procession. And of course, as we move forward, happy to talk to anyone about any of the propositions that we put. X3 Procession addresses some very specific requirements associated to process manufacturing and distribution of those products. And we're really excited to have conversations with installed X3 customers that have some of the specific use cases that we'll outline today. All right. Speaking to sort of the broader Sage community, there are some things on the roadmap for Sage Intacct and some other associated products. That is a bit in the distance, but I think if you like what you see today with regard to what we're talking about with Sage X3, you can be assured we are bringing other products to market to address some of those same critical concerns that you might have in expanding your use of your ERP and related business systems as we go forward. So that's a little bit of an introduction about what we'll be up to today. A little bit about myself. My name is Dan Riley. I'm the product manager here in the US, in the very cold state of North Carolina at this point. Oh, I'm sorry. That gives us the ability to go through and look at what our agenda is going to be. So from a certain perspective, we'll go through an introduction, talking about a little bit of the history about Sage X3 Procession. We'll address market verticals in terms of who we target, in terms of your business and what you're up to. We'll get into use cases, and then we'll do a solution overview. So in a 30-minute session, we don't have a great time to look at the product itself in terms of doing a demonstration. But again, as noted previously, we are happy to do that and engage with you on a one-on-one basis, or perhaps Jeremy will invite me back to do a more full-featured demonstration as we go forward into the year. All right. So moving on, here's the introduction. Ultimately, what I like to sort of frame up for people who are used to looking at an ERP system is to sort of rationalize what we consider to be an ERP. I'll have to do that. Sorry about that, folks. Rationalize an ERP that considers many of the classic things, procure to pay, sort of order to cash type of processes that are related to it. What we understand, though, is that there's other, what I would call affiliated or secondary related systems that can be meaningful, especially to a process manufacturer, right? So if we look at the regulatory component, which will address product lifecycle management, quality control, as well as some of the other related things for manufacturing in terms of equipment management. What X3 Procession does is address some of those things, at least partially, but to good effect, right? And so ultimately, if we talk about our core of what we do, it's really going to address a lot of these considerations with regard to if you're a chemical manufacturer, distributor, SDS authoring, and some of the managing of critical hazardous material handling, product lifecycle through the formulation and product development, and then really anyone who is manufacturing and running a quality control system, a really substantial enhancement to that solution in providing these types of solutions, right? So as we go forward and talk about it, who is Procession? What do we do? How did we get here? A couple things about us, really, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of the some of the longevity that we've had. We've been in the market since 2010, as we'll see, coming to market. We have over 125 active customers. And really, as we've turned the page into 2022, let's say, we've had some global success, right, in what Sage considers their UK and Ireland market. We've also had some great success down under in Australia. And that continues to be something that we want to push, right? So moving from a North American focused company to one that's a global perspective really has been a transition for us. And we do that in a couple different ways. Just to put it out there, we're able to support our customers on a 5x16 schedule and really have available sources and resources for linguistics and English, French, and Spanish, right? Ultimately, what we're very passionate about is really defining value for our customers in their existing systems as we go forward. So a little bit of that journey that we talk about. 2014 was a launch. We became an official ISV for Sage in 2015. We were acquired by Datacore, the company that I work for, in 2019. And that is sort of meant to continue the mission that we'll talk about, right? So the global launch, as I mentioned, happened in 2022. And then we have an expansion and continued release as we headed into last year. So speaking to that, what I like to do is continue thematically as we talk about the introduction. It's really addressing some of the things, some of the really far-reaching consequences that we have, right? And we'll talk about that in the concept for, let's say, any given process manufacturer, where it's not good enough to sort of, if we imagine sort of stamping out a part in the 1900s or thereabouts, we've really come up and sort of understand that there are some really essential things with regard to managing not only how we manufacture, but what and to what set of specifications, right? So I like to show this slide because it illustrates some of the things that X3 is very, very good at, right? In terms of management of your inventory, how things are used, really this essence of lot traceability that can be very important to any industry, but especially to ones that are very regulated. So as we talk about it, here's this concept of lot traceability, right? Where this gives us cradle to grave, as we might say, allowing stakeholders to know exactly what happens with quality, right? But really, if we talk about X3 as a good general solution, really there are some more specifics that we can define that would allow us to understand a better way to go about that, right? When we talk about products, we need to understand how we design them, in indicating exactly what the values are for associated properties, specifications as they were, and then ensuring costs and other parameters are met. If we take that concept of design, which is very key to Procession, we then go through and understand that the quality and outcomes for how we move product through our manufacturing system is equally important, right? When we tie all those three things together, we get a system that's very much in control, approaching some of those very classic regulated markets. So we think about pharmaceuticals and things like that, medical applications. But ultimately, what we've seen over the past 10 to 15 years is that this regulatory control, either by a government or a non-government agency, perhaps your customers, really is essential, right? Because they're asking more and more that we be in control. Certainly, this is of profound consequence when we consider food. There's been more and more legislation passed and other regulatory controls exhibited upon food because it feels like maybe every other month we hear about a big recall, right? So all the quality systems that are being thrust upon the food and beverage market, just as an example, is something that we see pervasively coming, and ultimately we can say that, hey, over time there will be more regulations and not less. So this is sort of something that we sort of branch out and talk about with regard to management of all these concepts and allowing you to have a much better handle, if you were, a very comprehensive view of cradle to grave design through manufacturing and distribution, and really giving us a good way forward. Talking a little bit of a twist on this is really talking about the concept of how people and how customers of X3 Consulting would actually drive product innovation. So if we talk about the concept of inbound requests, right? We're innovating, we're introducing new products as we go forward. That's something that gives us the ability to understand whether it's internal stakeholders or people external, our existing customers. We really manage a bunch of inbound requests. At Procession, we've seen as high as maybe 80, 85% of new product entries being managed in this capacity, right? Meaning people ask what they want because they want to be different, right? They want some uniqueness based on your product with a twist. And perhaps those of you engaged in that market are really understanding the benefit of an engineer to order or other type of process. This is something that Procession also seeks to address, right? In terms of managing what those inbound requests are, giving you a really good, I'd say, a CRM-like process to manage it. And then ultimately, when we talk about something that's a very big investment for your company, it's actually defining something that would actually boost efficiency, right? So people developing products are at the core of your business. They're very valued employees. If we can get incremental increases in their output and a more efficient control and an analytical understanding of what they're doing, this is something that is of great benefit to companies as they go to market. So this is just sort of sharing some of that very specific, but also very general things that we try to address, right? What we'll do now is we'll talk specifically about what X3 Procession is and move through some of those other use cases, right, associated to it. Here we have something that we'll talk a little bit about, which is going to be the workflow associated to Procession. And this is something I'll talk about specific features at the end of the presentation. But this gives us the ability to go ahead and, gives us the ability to go ahead and understand from an overarching view, what is Procession and what does it do? So the easiest way to explain it is to use an analogy of the three-legged stool, right? That's something that gives us the ability to manage the R&D formulation. This is something that we go through and manage those customer requests, go through formulation or other product development types of functions, right? Not necessarily, you don't have to call it a formula to have it be noticed as a product that we're developing, and then have that dovetail into the normal X3 parameters associated to manufacturing, right? From our standpoint, that gives us an ability to go through a normal X3 manufacturing process and then come out on the other side managing quality control associated to those elements. So we can see questions, responses, all those things actually done. Ultimately, all this ties together with a lot of hooks and other associated activity that we can do in that core manufacturing and distribution model, which we'll address. The other side, that is the X3 core. The other leg of the stool is really talking about the regulatory standpoint. This is something in our language that is defined by people managing chemical or other hazardous substances. There can be certainly some bleed over into industries that need to do this type of material handling. But really what we've created is a secondary set of data that goes deeper than the product, allowing you to manage chemical data at the CAS level, go forward and actually manage and maintain safety data sheets and other dangerous goods applications that would be part of your industry. Therefore, if you know you need it, you do need it. This is something that we also manage on an optional basis. All right. So moving ahead, let's talk a little bit about some of the use cases that we have. We're proud to talk about some of these as really defining what the value is of Procession as we go forward. All right. We will get and we'll talk generally about these. We are very, very happy to pass on references. Every one of these companies that I would show you is happy to take a call or otherwise attest to what Procession can do for them, including one that is public that we'll sort of note here as being in the X3 Consulting family, right? Aztec Oils. So moving forward, this case study is about food and beverage and really specifically about quality control. So a manufacturer of wholesale extracts and flavorings, as well as some very tasty candies, I might add, really has a concept of needing to attest with regard to what they're manufacturing for 90% of their customer base. Their customers need to know specifically on a lot level that what's been manufactured meets the specifications that they've all agreed to, right? This is exacerbated by the fact that, hey, not only do I need to produce a C of A for every lot that I ship, this is something that gives us the complexity of shipping many small lots on a shipment, right? And then this concept of a business-to-business world. So somebody shipping maybe 10 or 15 different lots, small pails, if you will, on a pallet, we might have maybe 10 to 15 C of A's that need to be prepared for a single shipment, right? So ultimately, what we've allowed for them to do is to go ahead, store these analytical results in, and at the time of shipment, generate all of these C of A's with the push of a button as a reporting function. So no more Excel or other sort of greenfield management of different data structures and needing to pull these different things in as we go forward. Next, we'll talk about food and beverage formulation. This also is a flavorings company here in the US. And ultimately, we describe this as something as an R&D process for 90% of their customers, right? This is alluding to and getting back to that concept of almost an engineer to order process. So what we've allowed them to do is to take an existing CRM tool, integrate that into the X3 stack with Procession, and actually manage that forward, right? They're able to manage what those costs, what the ingredient sourcing is, allergen visibility, all these things that we need to report on associated to a formulation as we go forward, while still making what we want to actually manage. And so for a company that manages up to 10,000 new formulations in the research space per year, this is something that really provided a level of critical function with regard to Procession. Next, we'll talk about, this is a food supplements application. So a little bit different. This is a contract encapsulation manufacturer. What we've been able to do in the course of managing their quality control is really take that concept of the product specifications and really drive forward on that. So this is something that actually feeds a more complex way of manufacturing, lots of details that are sort of checked on a really step-by-step operative basis for their manufacturing process, right? And this is something that also then feeds into the C of A. So imagine a very, very detailed, almost a pharmaceutical-like application that gives us the ability to manage those. And last, before we get to Aztec, is really talking about the chemical regulatory. This is a little bit of our sort of bread and butter and where we came from with regard to Procession. That gives us the ability to actually manage all that data. So this is a chemical manufacturer here in the Midwest of the US. And really, as we would describe it, they have a large nexus of chemical regulations, right? Things that they need to know about shipping to different parts of the US, different countries. So what we are able to do for them is manage all that data at a root level, the foundational level, provide through the formulation module and through their manufacturing solution so that, hey, as they actually make and ship goods, we're actually fixing the right labels, providing the right documentation to them, right? And so for those of you in those industries, things related to SDS, JHS labels, and as I also mentioned, dangerous goods declarations, all those things are possible in Procession in terms of an automated solution, right? We don't need to have something separate. This can be something that is part and parcel of what we do in X3 on a daily basis. So our last one that we're very, very proud of, and cheers to Jeremy and the team for addressing this critical need for Aztec oils. This is a company up in Derbyshire that gives us the ability to have a lubrication manufacturer in the UK. We're very excited about that. This was a critical quality control focus. As I've described previously, the need for Aztec post X3 Go Live was really to get to this level in terms of providing lot-specific information that needs to go out to various customers, right? So through Procession, we're able to manage and collect the analytical data about those properties, tie it to individual product lots, and really sort of, as we ship goods, hey, telling the customer that we're in control, that we're able to do that. And this was a really, really big deal for Aztec Oils, right, in terms of getting them to level up. We hope to continue to do more things with them as we go forward, but really a great customer for us, and we're happy to have them as a showcase associated to what we want to do. So the last thing we'll talk about is really the solution overview. As I noted previously, half an hour is a very, very tough draw to get into a demonstration. But as we talk about it, what I'll sort of get into is sort of breaking down a little bit of that understanding that we would have associated to what Procession is and as we go forward. So as we go forward, I again have come back to this process map that we would define. To break this down a little bit further as we go forward, we can see a really strong basis of understanding the process that would sort of add value into your organization, right? So loudly, as we go through and understand some of these, we'll talk about it. For pre-sales, R&D, formulation, product development, we're able to bring in and have a customer request manage. This is something that allows us to go back and retroactively look at our formulation library, our product library. We can do analytical analysis of things that you already have in the system to ensure that, hey, you're not going off on a bit of a walkabout, figuring something out from scratch when you might have a product that is already on the shelf and is a good starting point. We then go through and into a full-fledged formulation module, and that allows us to then understand and manage all of those as a really, really iterative process, right? For anyone who has tried to do that through a bill of material construct within an ERP, you know, that can be very clunky at best as we go forward. All of those things push into the manufacturing module, as you would expect, and really gives us a really clean handoff between the product development function and those things that we would support in operations and manufacturing, right? Take a different path forward and really talking about what we can do from a regulatory standpoint as we go ahead and actually manage that formulation within X3 Procession. That then gives us the ability to generate an SDS, right? Everything that we know about the formula and those chemical properties is stored in our CAS master. We're able to get that data from various sources, whether your own or other things that you'd subscribe to. And then we're actually able to generate through what that safety data sheet is, right? So we'll look at that in a moment associated to some of the things that we would expect to see as a benefit to that with regard to reporting and some of the other downstream work. But that gives us a great basis to understand what we might do. On the other side, when we talk about the outcomes here, we can see that quality control function be very, very meaningful. This is a great stepping off point, and one that I offer a personal anecdote about is that anyone who's trying to really get to storing analytical data in X3 understands that it's a very, let's say, incomplete product, right? It leaves a lot to be desired. So Procession really, truly addresses a lot of those concerns while perhaps not completely reinventing the wheel associated to what those things are. This is something where we've innovated around and in control with that X3 space, and that gives us the ability to go forward. All this is tied together with manufacturing and distribution, as we'll see as we move forward. So what we've done here is we've taken a couple things associated to that. As we talk about the legs of the stool, I do want to sort of share a little bit of how that function would look within X3. Here we're actually looking at the R&D formula, and what you will see is a very comparative screen. And I always tell people that if you're used to a bill of material, imagine something that is very to that function, but actually going ahead and actually designing various and giving you the ability to innovate a little bit more in that space, right? We can see here that this is our first look at an actual function within X3. This is the UI, right? This is exactly what we're doing. So as we talk about the uptake of any given Procession function for an existing X3 customer, that gives us the ability to understand, hey, we're not dealing with the new UI, we're dealing with a single database, single platform type of solution. And therein lies the benefit of doing it, right, in terms of user adoption and how those things are actually going to go forward. Here we're actually seeing the ingredients or the components of that function. We can see up here at the top various things associated to calculations that we would have, specifications, as well as the hazard and regulatory pieces. There is also a full estimating function associated to formulation, and that gives us the ability to go through and actually manage the actual delivery of those specifications to your customers and in terms of completing that process as we go forward. From a regulatory control standpoint, I've shown two cut sheets here. The first is actually going to be managing that safety data sheet itself, which is for those of you who are not aware, is a very detail-oriented, multi-sectioned part that gives just everything you ever want to know about a chemical substance, right? So I've shown a cut sheet here that gets to the classification of the product. There are different other sections of the SDS that we would actually do. And so we can actually see things that we would associate to it, including there at the bottom, the hazard phrases that really get to some of the things that are required upon us as distributors of chemicals to make people aware, other safety and first responders associated to perhaps cleaning up a chemical spill. You can all understand the requirement to do that. And this is the onus that's forced upon us as manufacturers of these substances. Over on the right, we have a little bit of a cut sheet that would actually show a safety data sheet as it lies for a paint substance, right? We can see some of those little not so friendly looking pictographs. That's all something that Procession handles as we talk about the delivery of what those documents are going to do. Moving on, we'll talk about quality control. As I may note here, it's sometimes is a little bit difficult to sort of share what a quality control process looks like. That's very different for different types of manufacturers as we go forward, right? The product technical sheet is one that gives us the ability to actually go ahead and take all of these disparate things that we would do. And again, speaking to anyone who's tried to implement this solution within X3, the starting point for this is really going to a single function within X3 Procession indicating what the product is that we're actually manufacturing and capturing specifications about, or actually distributing. And then actually going through and actually managing what that is. We can see that there are different questions that we can ask. And in one single frame, we're actually able to specify different test methods that we'd be using to specify what that's going to do, indicating whether this should be part of a CA array or not, and then actually some variability based on whether this is something that we want to track as we purchase or acquire material, or things that we would do on a miscellaneous receipt or other non-PO activity. Over on the right, we can actually see what those target values are going to be. So a target, as well as different ranges that we would actually specify within the product as we go forward. Ultimately, this is just one of the functions that we would do, but I do, for those people coming from X3, understanding how difficult that can be in terms of managing the questions and responses there, this is sort of the first aha moment that we would describe in the course of having X3 Procession manage quality control. The other associated functions that we would have is actually allowing you to have a better function for collecting that data on the QC workbench, an entirely separate function that we call quick entry that allows you to disassociate the entry of analytical data from stock. So for instance, if I wanted to do a pre-receipt associated to a PO that's coming in, I actually can do that in Procession as a separate function and not have to go through the quality control workbench. So really meaningful function that we can innovate around and actually drive it. Ultimately, as we describe it, as we go to manufacture and distribute, all those things that we know about a given lot are things that are brought forward and defined. So imagine as I go to actually distribute goods, I'm working within my delivery or shipping document. We're able to push one button and get all the data that we've collected that's framed up here in our tech sheet out, associated to a manifest or other shipping document that you would actually have on the solution. All right. And lastly, here as we move forward with regard to manufacturing and distribution, are some of those tie-outs. Again, it becomes a little bit hard to show in one sheet, but what I like to do is sort of share a little bit of that information with regard to what some of that reporting might look at. So I've chosen a dangerous goods type of application, right? This is one where all of the things that come from Procession with regard to formulation, SDS, and other things associated to it gives us the ability to go through and actually manage things on a work order traveler associated to it. So here we can see the Procession batch ticket that tells people what PPE to use, some of the other health and safety information that is related to it, as well as other things that we would pull from the formula. So if you've ever struggled to sort of include much more enhanced manufacturing instructions, other things that people need to know to be safe and correct as they manufacture goods, Procession also enables that as an outcome associated to the manufacturing solution. So I think that leaves us out of time. Jeremy, let me throw it over to you to discuss what you think next steps would be, and obviously, the last word on the webcast.
Thank you so much, Dan. That was excellent, and 12:29, spot on the timing. So thank you, Dan, for sharing a lot of content in that time. Certainly very helpful. We will be, as we know, recording this session, so it will be available to distribute after today for people who want to see it again and spend more time looking at the screens that Dan has shared. So we'll definitely be doing that. But alluding to what Dan has just said, clearly for individual needs, it's important maybe to have a one-to-one session. So I would invite anybody on the call to reach out to me as a first next step. You can see my details on the screen, and we can organize a one-to-one session with myself, Dan, and the team at DataCore to get into some more detail that clearly needs to be shared for your own individual requirement. So I can't see any questions in the chat box. So nothing on today, Dan, but I'm sure there'll be more in the future when that situation comes around. And thank you, everyone. That's the key message on this slide for attending today and coming with us on this journey for Procession, and look forward to discussing more of that with you guys and anyone in the future. So thank you, and it's goodbye from me and Dan.